The observation deck of the Sentinel's Pride hummed with the familiar thrum of quantum drives, a sound that had become background noise to everyone aboard. Claire stood at the viewport, her gloved hands clasped behind her back, watching the swirling nebula that stretched across their starboard side like watercolor painted across the void. She had been assigned to this sector for 3 standard months, now a diplomatic liaison between humanity and the Cathari, a species of feline-descended beings whose empire spanned 12 systems. The Cathari were formidable, faster than humans, stronger in short bursts, and possessed of senses that made human perception seem almost quaint. They had been wary of humanity at first, as most species were. Humans were soft, they said. Fragile. Their technology compensated for weak biology. Claire had heard it all before. Behind her, a group of Cathari cubs tumbled across the deck, their spotted fur rippling as they mock-fought under the watchful eye of their guardian, Reshka. The cubs were the offspring of the diplomatic envoy, young, curious, and endlessly energetic. They had taken to following Claire during her shifts, fascinated by the strange human who smelled wrong and moved too slowly. Liaison Claire. Reshka's gravelly voice interrupted her thoughts. The cubs grow restless. Perhaps you should return to your quarters. Claire turned, offering a slight smile. They're fine, Reshka. Let them play. The Cathari warrior's ears flattened slightly, a sign of mild disapproval. You are too permissive. Human softness. Maybe, Claire said, turning back to the viewport. Or maybe I just remember what it's like to be young. One of the cubs, a small female named Lisses, bounded up to Claire, chirping excitedly. She pawed at Claire's leg, trying to climb up the human's uniform. Claire laughed, gently disengaging the cub's claws from the fabric. Careful, little one. These uniforms aren't cheap. Lissa chittered and batted at Claire's gloved hand. The other cubs joined in, circling around the human, their bioluminescent markings flickering with excitement. They had been fascinated by Claire's gloves since day one. Thick, reinforced material that covered her hands at all times. The Cathari wore no such things. Their paws were naturally armored. Their claws, retractable. Why do you always wear those? Lissa asked in broken standard, her voice high and musical. Claire held up her hands, flexing her fingers within the gloves. Regulations, she said simply. Human hands are delicate. We need protection. Weak. One of the other cubs chirped, and the group dissolved into chittering laughter. Claire smiled, but said nothing. Let them think what they wanted. The alarm came without warning. Klaxons blared throughout the ship, red emergency lighting flooding the observation deck. Reshka was on her feet instantly, her fur standing on end, claws extended. The cubs scattered, crying out in fear. Hull breach, Deck 7. The ship's AI announced in its calm, emotionless tone. Atmospheric containment failing. All personnel evacuate to emergency pods. Claire's heart hammered in her chest, but her training took over. Reshka, get the cubs to the pods. Now. What about you? The warrior's eyes were wide, pupils dilated. I'm right behind you. Go. Reshka hesitated for only a moment before gathering the cubs and herding them toward the emergency exit. Claire sprinted in the opposite direction, toward the breach. The corridor tilted violently as the ship's stabilizers struggled to compensate. Through the viewport, she could see debris spinning away into space, twisted metal, and shattered composite panels. When she reached Deck 7, the scene was chaos. A dozen Cathari crew members were trapped behind a collapsed bulkhead, the air shimmering as it vented into space through a jagged tear in the hull. The emergency sealant had failed. They had minutes at most. Claire didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed an emergency support beam from the wreckage and wedged it under the bulkhead. Her muscles screamed as she pushed, leveraging her weight against the twisted metal. It barely budged. A Cathari officer, his fur matted with blood, stared at her through the gap. Get back, he shouted. Claire took off her gloves. The Cathari's words died in his throat, Human hands were indeed delicate, soft skin, no claws, no natural armor. But they were also precise, dexterous, and filled with something the Cathari didn't possess. Sweat glands that provided grip even in the most hostile conditions. Claire's bare fingers found purchase on the beam. She planted her feet, feeling the cold metal beneath her skin, and pulled. Tendons stood out on her wrists. Her knuckles turned white. The beam groaned, shifted, and then with a shriek of tortured metal, the bulkhead lifted. "Go! Now!" she roared. The Cathari didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled through the gap, one after another. As Claire held the beam steady, her arms trembled. Blood ran down her palms where the metal had cut into her flesh. But she didn't let go. The last Cathari squeezed through just as Claire's strength gave out. She released the beam and dove backward as the bulkhead crashed down with a deafening clang. The emergency sealant finally deployed, foam expanding to plug the hull breach. Claire lay on the deck, gasping, her hands burning with pain. She stared at her palms, torn, bleeding, but still functional, still human. The Cubs found her in the medical bay an hour later. Lissa was the first through the door, her eyes wide. The others followed, unusually quiet. They approached Claire's bed slowly, staring at her bandaged hands. You saved them," Lissa whispered. "Without protection, your hands." Claire smiled tiredly. "Yeah, my hands. But you are soft, weak." The cub's voice was confused, almost pleading. "Maybe," Claire said, holding up her bandaged hands. "But humans don't survive because we're strong. We survive because we're stubborn, because when something needs doing, we do it gloves or no gloves." The cubs were silent for a long moment. Then, Lissa chirped softly and pressed her small head against Claire's arm. The Cathari gesture of deepest respect. One by one, the other cubs did the same. Commander Lucas found her later that evening, her hands properly treated and wrapped in regenerative bandages. He stood in the doorway of her quarters, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "The Cathari diplomatic envoy wants to speak with you," he said. Apparently, the cubs ran straight to the command staff after they left medical. "Told them everything. About your hands. About what you did. About what you did." "Am I in trouble?" Claire asked. Lucas shook his head slowly. "The opposite. The Cathari elder wants to formally recognize your actions. They're calling you bare-handed, a title of honor among their warriors." He paused, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Apparently, taking off your gloves is the most Cathari thing a human has ever done." Claire laughed, wincing as the motion pulled at her injuries. "That you did." Lucas stepped into the room, his expression growing serious. "You could have died, Claire. That bulkhead could have crushed you." "I know. So why?" Claire looked down at her bandaged hands, her soft, weak, human hands. "Because someone had to. And I was there." Lucas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Humanity? Fuck yeah," he said quietly. Claire grinned. "Yeah, something like that." Outside her viewport, the nebula continued its eternal dance, beautiful and indifferent. But aboard the Sentinel's Pride, the Cathari looked at humanity with new eyes. The soft species, the fragile ones, the ones who took off their gloves when it mattered most.